Hello and welcome to this next interview where I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Robeson, who's the co-founder of Northeast Capital and the CEO of Core Technology Ventures. Hi Simon, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Thanks, Paul. And thank you for inviting us to participate in Newcastle Startup Week. We're absolutely delighted and wish you all the best with it.
No, thank you. Well, I was very excited when you got in touch. I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago and out of the blue and
Yeah.
somehow you'd found me or seen some of the stuff we were doing. But
Yeah. Well, we'd seen, you've done a fair bit in this sector. So, you're front center when you start looking for, well-networked people who believe in the same things we believe in, which is, supporting startups. And obviously we have a particular twist on that, but,
yeah,
we'll get to that.
Yeah, well, that was definitely when we were talking on the phone, and then when you sent through the information, it is very exciting. So, do you want to start at the beginning and just say a little bit about who you are and who
Very happily.
Technology Ventures is?
Very happily. Very happily, thank you. So, most importantly, I actually live in the Northeast, which I think helps.
Yeah.
I'm actually Irish originally, but don't hold that against me. But I married a Northeasterner, and I've lived here now for nearly 17, 18 years. Yeah. Of relevance to this conversation, I've been working in investment banking for about 20 odd years, 25 years. I set Core Technology Ventures up in 2001. And that is a fairly traditional corporate finance business, very focused on investing in, and I should say, more importantly, providing sort of corporate finance services to startups, clever people with clever ideas coming out of universities and wanting to spin that technology out, commercialize it, turn it into a business. We'll talk about that, I think, a bit more later on. But that's been my focus now for, as I say, for a very long time. And I've been doing that. Obviously, I've got my own team, but I've also, as you do when you're a small business, myself as a startup in 2001, you rely heavily on other people in your sector. And from a relatively early stage, I started working with a firm called MTI, which again we'll talk about perhaps in a minute. But they were a supplier of deal flow to me at Core Tech Ventures. And over the years, we've raised in the region of our best part of $200 odd million for early stage companies. At various stages of their development. Some companies we've raised money for, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Others, sadly, they make it, to the second stage, and that's the end of it. But anyway, so that's sort of the background to Core Tech. We continue to work with early stage companies. Majority of the work we've done so far has been international. So we've had clients all over the world, very heavily in the US. But also outside of the UK, in if you like, continental Europe, because our focus from day one has been in clean energy technology, and we've done a lot in hydrogen, which is a real specialist subject for us. In fact, we've run, or a colleague of mine went off to run a hydrogen electrolysis company for 10 years called ITM Power, which is now worth about 1.2 billion. On the London stock market. So we're obviously very excited by that. But yeah, so, and that's led us to operating in the Northeast to become aware of the opportunity up here.
Mm-hmm. So why? Well, I know you're based here, obviously, but yeah. What is it about the Northeast that makes you want to do something here?
Well, so specifically, obviously, we've been aware as a company, Core Tech, of what's happening in the Northeast universities in terms of spin-outs. Relatively low numbers of spin-outs compared to their contemporaries down south, but that's understandable. They're often smaller universities. So we've been aware of it. We've not really done much work in the Northeast for Northeast spin-outs, be they universities or from large corporates or technical institutes. But as we all know, we've had this sort of seismic change in the political sphere up here, where we've now got 7 new Conservative MPs, and with it, as importantly, we've got a promise of funds, structural funds and other funds to help the Northeast, rebalance with the rest of the country. And that for us, and for any investor, I make no apology for it, is a hugely important part of the decision-making process behind where you, for example, try to raise a fund. Mm-hmm. So that was a key factor. The other was the existence up here of a surprising amount of surprising to us, and I think to the rest of the venture capital community outside of the region, a surprising amount of intellectual property development. To be clear, by intellectual property, we're talking about inventions, design. Typically for us, it's the stuff we're interested in is science and engineering type spin-outs. And we decided to take a look at how much IP, how much intellectual property is being developed in the region, and there's a very useful place to go and find that. And it's a university/government website that looks at a thing called Research Power, and Research Power is a sort of measurement, the sort of 5 stars, if you like, that looks at the amount of research being done in a region that could be commercialized or is of note or of special interest or exceptional, but also not just the quantity but the quality of research being done. And we were very pleased to note that actually if you lump all 5, if I can refer to just 5 of the larger, more sciencey type universities up here together, you end up with it's a bit of an arbitrary number, I suppose, but with 1,600 as a sort of combination of, as I say, quantity and quality of activity. And this compares extremely well with the research power, say, in Cambridge or Oxford University. Mm-hmm. Which is around the sort of 1,500-1,600 level. Of course, that's a single university measure, 1,600-1,700 for Cambridge or for Oxford. And so I think historically, investors have looked at the region and they've looked at individual universities, and it's just not looked to them like there's going to be sufficient deal flow for an investment fund. Mm-hmm. We've looked at it completely differently. We've looked at it as the Northeast. We've combined all those universities, research power, and you've ended up with a number which is comparable. It's comparable to Oxford or Cambridge. Mm. So that combined with the political atmosphere, and we've had, despite the pandemic we're all going through, we've had meaningful, in our view, reassurances that that there isn't going to be a backing down of the support for the region. We will take that at face value, and we'll plow on and work to get this fund raised. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting for me to hear, because I've never heard of that research power before. So yeah, interesting to know how you make decisions, how the investment community makes decisions on where to spend money, because I suppose a lot of the work that I've done independently, my own business, or previously I worked for Tech North, which is now Tech Nation, Tech City UK, and I've worked with local enterprise agencies and stuff. A lot of our work was about trying to shine a light on the opportunities and trying to promote the regions, the north of England, and try to encourage investors to pay attention and look at what was going on. But a lot of that is just kind of trying to pull all the assets together and package it up and say, look at all this stuff going on, look at all these interesting people. But you're right, the Northeast, most of the time, it just doesn't go beyond just saying there are 5 universities. Yeah, it doesn't say, I've never seen it packaged up as there are 5 universities and this is how many research publications or work of note has come out of these universities. So I think that's really good to know.
It makes complete sense. Once you've found the numbers, it all makes complete sense for us to think about raising a fund, because there's a sort of a rule of thumb if you're in venture capital that you won't invest in companies more than, say, 100 miles away or 1 hour away. These are the sort of, because investing in early stage companies involves an enormous amount of hand holding. one finds that when you've worked with a lot of early stage companies, you bring an awful lot of experience of what the growing pains, pitfalls, bear traps, are of trying to grow a business, and specifically a technology business. One of those things is that it involves an enormous amount of work, and you need to be close to the companies in which you invest. Now, the beauty of the Northeast is, actually the universities are all close enough to be within that, certainly within that 100-mile radius. And so it's just another tick in the box for us. I should mention, because I've talked about Cortec and I've talked about, we're creating this fund called Northeast Capital. I mentioned earlier MTI. I mean, we would not be able to do this. I am not I've never managed a fund and invested money on behalf of other people. That's not my part of that's not what I do as part of the team. The people who are very expert at that is one of my colleagues at Cortec, who's at one point was working for the most prolific investor in technology in the UK called YFM, and he was an investment director there. But also this fund, this company I mentioned earlier called MTI, and they've been investing in startups from universities since 1983. Okay, so we're talking about one of the oldest venture capital funds in the country. And they, their most recent fund that they've just closed, as in they're fully invested, is in Manchester, the UMI Premier Fund, and that fund was a £32 million fund. They invested it very interestingly, actually. Then part of their investments were very traditional. Get involved, create a company, license the technology out of the university into an entity, put some money in, and off you go. And they invested in, which is typical for a fund of 32 million, about 12 to 15 companies, keeping it in a broad brush. 3 of which are real stars, and we can talk about those if you like. But interestingly, so they've obviously got a lot of experience of investing. They were attached to Manchester University, but they were also able, their focus was Manchester University, but they were able to invest in Oxford and Edinburgh universities as well. So they've got all that experience behind them. And having worked with them since I started Cortec and raised some money for some of their companies over the years, so we kind of got to know the good bits and the bad bits. So we're well and truly we're an established team in that respect. It would make perfect sense to me that if as the Northeasterner, to encourage MTI to join forces with us in partnership with this, and to help raise and run this fund. So I'm obviously hugely excited about that from a Cortec perspective. And I simply wouldn't be able to do anything like as bold, as large as what we envisage with Northeast Capital without the partnership with MTI.
Yeah. Excellent. So do you want to explain a bit more about Northeast Capital, what that is? And
yeah. So what it isn't is a vanilla venture capital fund. So, which is the last thing the Northeast needs. Another, I'm not going to mention the names because they're not in the region, but they've been here and they've left the region. So you all know who I'm talking about, who turn up, with a chunk of money, and they run it as a limited partnership fund, which is a very traditional type of fund with all sorts of limitations that we can talk about. And they invest in the company. Basically what those sorts of funds do is they're putting money into the companies. They're putting some people on the board, probably from outside of the fund management group, and then they move on to the next one. And very often these funds, particularly if they're funds, one of the metrics or KPIs is how quickly can they get the money out the door. And that has a real value, don't get me wrong. If you're lucky and one of the companies you invest in happens to have a fully formed management team, know exactly what they're doing, and are lucky enough that their business plan turns out to be their business, then that's tremendous. That works well. But our experience of working with spin-outs, which is a very specialized, you need a lot of experience to get that right, and or rather to get it wrong less. Okay. is that you need to do you need a completely different sort of fund that will do very different things. One of the things we've looked at, for example, I'm not going to go into the technical aspect of it because that's our intellectual property, that's our know-how, is we've come up with a completely novel structure for the fund. So we're not doing a traditional limited partnership fund. We're not doing a traditional evergreen fund. These are corporate structures for funds. We're coming up with something very different that means that we won't fall foul of the issue that the majority of traditional vanilla venture capital funds have. When I say vanilla, clearly I'm using that in the finance speak world, i.e. plain, normal, typical fund. We're not going to be that structurally, because if you do things just traditionally within traditional structure, you find very quickly that these funds tend to be structured as 10-year funds, the traditional ones, the vanilla ones, without the sprinkles and the 99, just the traditional fund. And they've got a 10-year life, at the end of which they've typically run out of money. And if you're unfortunate enough to be one of their investments, they're unable to support you any further, and you're basically then, you're not fed to the wolves. That's not at all what happens. But you are left at the mercy of the vulture capitalists out there, which we're all guilty of, who will see an opportunity and then that fund will not get true value for its investments, so that the investors in the fund will then be worse off. There are all sorts of issues around traditional vanilla type funds that are not good news for the investees. When I mean investees, I mean the companies in which those funds invest. They come with a lot of restrictions. And so what we're doing is we're coming up with I should talk more about us and not about what we're not doing. We're coming up with a structure that means that we can continually fundraise and that we can continually support the companies in which we invest. It's not rocket science, but it's a difficult one to sell. It's difficult to sell that to investors. But we believe that, with the sort of zeitgeist of post-COVID, we hope, the new world in which I think we're all inhabiting, we think that there will be appetite for people who are bold enough to come out and say the old way of venture capital funds is no longer relevant for early stage companies. Lots of other funds, fine, for different stages. For early stage, this isn't right. So we'll be able to continually fundraise. We'll also be able to encourage our investors to reinvest their profits back into the fund. Mm-hmm. And we as fund managers will reinvest our profits back into the fund to ensure that, there isn't a cliff edge for our investee companies when they get to a certain point and get fed to the wolves, if you like, that we can keep on supporting them. So that's one really, really key difference. The other is, as I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of this before. So, and you can't just put money, there's an expression, spray and pray. It's rather unfortunate, but the suggestion being that you just put the money in the company, hope it works out, move on to the next one, which I mentioned earlier. You can't do that in early stage tech unless you want a very high failure rate. You've got to get in, you've got to sit with the companies, you could put the overalls on. Sometimes you've got to become part of the company. I mean, that's how involved you become. You're adopting unofficially executive roles all the time in order to move these companies on. So that's something that we will bring in bucket loads to our investees. And also, because we're specialists, we've got lots of mates out there who run other funds who are eager to know what we're going to do next. And so if you take the fund in Manchester, that raised, obviously, the 32 million, well, 27 or 25 odd million went into the companies directly. And those companies attracted over 150 million pounds worth of co-investment. So corporates, other big funds, all piled into those companies in which MTI, I was going to say I do think of us as we because we are a team, but they're the specialist fund managers that they invested in. They attracted all this money into those companies, very often into that region, which is absolutely vital part of what we're trying to do as well. They did one other thing that might be of interest and may or may not work in the Northeast. We don't know. It'll be down to our investors, but 10% of that 32 million, so £3 and a bit million, in Manchester was invested in what we call POP investments. Is that something you're familiar with?
I heard of that. No.
So normally early stage funds invest in spin outs.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually investing in ideas before they were spun out.
Right.
So as a way to encourage, and this is something we can talk about if you like, and it's the impact side of a fund like ours and the impact it can have. But one of the ways to encourage postdocs and professors to think about commercializing their IP, because a lot of these guys, they don't want to do that. They want to publish their IP. You know, they want the citations and to their name, which is absolutely right. That's the nature of the structure of their activity. I was going to say business. You know what I mean? But you know, a big part of what you need to do when you start a fund in a new region for the first time is you've got to encourage the professors and the postdocs to think about some of their inventions and how they might be commercialized. And one way to do that is to make a bit of money available, sort of pre-commercialization. In fact, at the point at which, you know, let's say one of the profs has had an idea, or his research group, they've had an idea, and they trot along to typically their technology transfer office, who are the people in the university who help them think about whether this could be commercialized. And there's a series of things that a good TTO will then ask this inventor or invention group to go away and think about. You know, what might the route to market be? Who else is out there? Might we need to actually license some IP ourselves in order to make this work? And there's a lot of other technical and engineering sort of stuff that this research or research group can go away and work on. Nothing better than to actually provide a pot of money to enable those people to go out and do that research. Mm-hmm. You know, that really can make a difference to them. And I suspect you're probably thinking, well, how do you get a return on that? Mm-hmm. And what we actually do is it's a very simple. It's a one-page, really an option agreement that we get, you know, that everybody signs in the university, and obviously us, that says that if the idea goes on to be commercialized, and bear in mind, commercializing isn't just spin out; it's also licensing. Mm-hmm. Then, yeah, sure, we will have a chunk of equity in that spin out. If it doesn't, it's torn up. Never happened. Well, it happened. It's hopefully improved the knowledge of the people in the university. They've been through a process which has been useful, but it doesn't have, on balance, commercial application, and so, you know, that's the end of it. And that having that is a very useful way of encouraging universities to think about spin-outs. And we did some work on spin-outs, and the Northeast collectively in the last 10 years, I think we've got like 106 spin-outs from the universities, which compares with about 200 from Oxford and about 300 from Cambridge. And bear in mind what I was saying earlier about research power. So we've got the power, but we're just not getting the spin-outs. Yeah. You know, there's an imbalance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Number of reasons for that.
Okay, I get that. So yeah, if you can use a little bit of extra cash to incentivize them to take the idea a little bit further, that sounds like, well, it sounds like a good investment to me.
Yeah, well, we I don't think we can claim we invented it, but we certainly perfected it and tailored it for Manchester, to the extent that there's a big one of the biggest providers of investment into funds is a thing called the European Investment Fund, which is part of the European Investment Bank. Mm-hmm. And they described our approach to what's called proof of principle funding, that pot of money I described, as the gold standard. So that's great, and that stood us in very good stead. Obviously, to have that as an accolade is very meaningful. So yeah, we're going to do lots of other things. If we can do that, we will. If we can't, it's not the end of the world. You know, we're going to have all sorts of outreach programs to get into universities, to help them if they're interested, which we believe they are and will be, just talking them through what are the processes of spinning out or licensing technology. And we'll have all sorts of speakers coming in. We'll be working very closely with you on all of this, Paul, I hope. And so it's going to be a key part of we term that outreach, which is a slightly public sector word for me, but that's what we call it. That's what it's doing. Yeah. And if you combine that with the availability of investment capital across more than one or two stages of a company's life, you end up hopefully creating an environment here in the Northeast, which is, ideal for spin-outs, for technology, which is what historically what the Northeast has always been about. Mm-hmm. Huge numbers of critical inventions come out of the Northeast. So we think that if we get that right, which we're incentivized to do, because as I said, we want to keep raising more and more money for the same fund, mm-hmm. then it's a bit of a perfect storm, we hope.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an expert in investment, but the way you've described it sounds really, it's not obvious, but it sounds like a sensible or
it is obvious. It is logical
way of doing it. So I don't know why. Yeah. Apart from Manchester, does anyone else do it this way, or is this
very much so. Yeah, they are. They're not in the Northeast, but they do exist. They're often funds that are bound to certain universities, although that's become less and less of a thing, shall we say. There's a very famous one out there called IP Group.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have been involved in at the very beginning of that fund when I was a sort of a brand new corporate financier in an investment bank called Beeson Gregory, and I was on the team that helped to create a company called IP to IPO, which is the precursor to IP Group. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea was, in those days, it was all about IPOs, and you could float almost any business on the AIM market. And so, it was a very clever name. We thought, IP, intellectual property, to IPO, initial public offering. And that worked very well for us. There was a deal with Oxford University, who needed some cash to build a new, they'd already raised most of it, but they needed a bit more to build a new chemistry faculty. Oxford remains the largest chemistry faculty in the world. Isn't that amazing? It was then and it is now. And it was thanks to a chap called Professor Graham Richards, who was the sort of the beacon there, who was chair of Oxford chemistry, who drove that deal. And so we at Beesons were asked to go and raise a bit of money to go alongside some of the foundation capital to build that faculty, and very proud of that. And it's now gone on to be worth anything between hundreds of millions and billions, depending on where they are in their investment cycle. But it's been a raging success. They're doing most of what they're doing now is they're doing a lot in Australia and the US now. But anyway, so there are funds out there, but it remains, and you may want to talk about this, but it remains very difficult for a spin out to raise the money they need to go on and be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's really exciting is that you do have that track record, and you've got that experience and knowledge and insight from outside the region that you're bringing in, but you've also got that passion for the region as well. You're putting in you're looking to raise a serious amount of money to put into the region as well. It's not small
beer. No, there's no point. No. The last thing the region needs is more pots of 1 million, 5 million. You can't. All you're doing, actually, in most cases, is you're creating heartbreak, because you're giving people just enough money to spin their technology out of the university, and then they're in what used to be called the Valley of Death. You're in this area where there's no. That's it. You've got a bit of money from this tiny fund. You've probably gone to your family. They probably put a bit of money in alongside you. and you've got to a certain stage, you've probably raised enough to give you 12 to 18 months. That's typical of a seed investment for a spin out. But then there's no one to take the baton. There's no more money from the funds, you know, and yet your I was going to say business. It's not even a business then. It's still a company with great ideas. It's probably almost certainly still pre-commercial. It's probably pre-revenue. It's definitely pre-profitability. And the only funds out there, which is the case today, once you've got past those smaller funds, are are funds that will invest in companies with profits, or at the very least, sight of profits, as the expression goes, sight of profitability. And your stuff, that's it. You sit there wishing that you had stayed in the university. And our advice at times, during the 20 odd years I've been in this game, has been stay where you are. But there isn't the cash that you're going to need over successive rounds to get this really only it majority applies to science and engineering, to intellectual property type companies, sort of things that we're we like to invest in and work with and for. It's a long road. I mentioned that we've got 3 real stars from our fund in Manchester. We've had shares in those companies from anything from 2000 and it's about 10. I think the longest is about 10 years. So I won't mention any names, but these are companies in bioscience, in clean energy, and in water purification. So 3 absolutely cracking areas to be shareholders in, really exciting companies that have gone on, as I say, to raise a lot of co-investment from people outside of our fund in Manchester. But they are still, they're still raising money. They're still pre-profitable, and some of them, I say, they probably range between 6 and 10 years old. I think the oldest of the 3 is 10 years old. Great success stories, but and when they IPO, when they are bought by someone else, some, as we call, big ugly in their sectors, who come in and snaffle them, that'll be great, and that'll be a tremendous payday for everybody involved who supported our fund in Manchester. But I think what it does do is point very clearly to the fact that you have got to be patient. You'll have heard of this expression, patient capital.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
That is there's no point getting involved in startups or starting up a company yourself if you're not prepared to be part in there for the long haul. It doesn't mean it's grim for 10 years. I mean, the success these companies have had is fantastic, and they are all top of their field, and they're going to go on and make a lot of money, and they're going to produce goods that we all buy and need to buy for our health, for our zero carbon energy needs, and because we don't like to have microplastics in our water anymore. So you're talking about absolutely fundamental areas, but it's a long haul, and that's one of the reasons we've looked so closely at our structure. That we aren't going to run out of money as we're building these companies up to a certain point, and why, if you get into this game, you can't play at it because you break hearts. You can't get involved in startup companies and move them one piece, along the road to commercialization, and then say, sorry, we're out of cash, over to you, good luck. I mean, that's just a disaster. So that's our plan.
Exciting. Okay. So what will your focus be for the new fund?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the things we've learned is, as investors and corporate financiers, is that when you invest in, it's very easy to invest in a company because what they're developing is terribly exciting. It's hugely disruptive. It's breakthrough, and get captured by the emotion of that investment. There's a lot of that goes on. We've been guilty of it. We probably still will be occasionally guilty of it because we're human beings. But what we look for now religiously is market pull. Okay, so we will, we're in the market anyway in the various sectors I've mentioned, but we'll be out there paying attention to what their technology needs are. It's a ghastly expression, but it does actually fit the bill, and our investment committee meetings, which will have not just us but also other notable names from the venture capital community. They will they will challenge us. If I bring a company to the investment committee and say, we should put 2 million into this or 500,000 into that, they're going to challenge me about the market needs. Show me the demand for this. I mean, obviously, they've got to go and develop their product. That might take 5 years, and it might take them 10 years before it can be fully commercialized and capital gain developed for the fund. But where's the pull from the market for this? Because the alternative is, as I mentioned, you get completely emotionally invested in an idea, you stick some money in, and then you're in what's called the technology push game, where you're trying to shove this brilliant idea down the throats of large corporates who not really what they're interested in. It's not really the problem they're trying to solve. You look at the fuel cell market or hydrogen and fuel cell market. I was heavily invested in that area 10 years ago, and I was pushing everything I was talking about to the large corporates, shall we say, very, very large number of them. They were sort of doing other things, or they were doing their own thing, and they hadn't really discovered that they had a problem with their own thing yet. So, come back when you've done this, come back when you've done that. Whereas now, there is enormous market pull for hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. The market wants it, the market needs it, and it's driven by regulation. It's driven by what's happening in Europe with zero carbon technology. So electrolysis has gone crazy. A little company that we were involved in, I mentioned earlier, worth over £1 billion, because that's the zeitgeist. That's where we're going. Europe has said we're coming out of fossil fuels. It's all about hydrogen economy. So you're looking for those, but you've got to get your timing right. You get your timing wrong, and you're holding a basket of stuff that's going to go nowhere. You get it right, and you've got people climbing over each other to come and get involved in those companies. And the pixie dust, the thing that helps you make the right decision is this market push? Is this market pull? Really dig into that. It's one of the things that we talked about proof of principle investments earlier. It's one of the things that we ask the research groups to think about. Think about the market. Where is it now? When is this really going to happen? But so part of to answer your question, part of market pull is, particularly for a regional fund, is what else is going on in the region. And this region is known for, it's got a lot of health tech going on here. You've got the Center for Aging, got all sorts of national institutes in this region. What are some of the best people, best brains in the country sitting in institutes up the road? So that's a very significant part of the decision-making process for us in what sort of things will we invest in, is what is there in the region. As I mentioned, aging, you've also got a lot of clean tech going on. You've got a lot of offshore energy. You've got a lot of subsea tech. You've got a lot of automotive tech. In Manchester, totally different story. Different region, different corporates, very pharma, a lot of nuclear, graphene, unsurprisingly. There's graphene here, Durham spin out, famously. Durham Graphene, I think it's called something else now. But so we will be looking to invest in spin-outs that have an almost natural home in the region because of the other activity that's going on in the region. Because you've got to staff these companies, and you've got to help these companies to identify strategic collaboration partners. And if we've got a tremendously powerful automotive cluster, just a bit further away from me, the Center of Aging, but in the region, and that's made up a very large number of, from Nissan down to, smaller companies in the supply chain. That's a wonderful resource as an investor in technology that might have an application in automotive. It's a tremendous resource on a doorstep. So why would we, as a concept, you get that wonderful, when you move into a region and you look at what it's got, in the Northeast, you have got, that all the absolute bones, the beginnings of there's this wonderful Turkish expression, which is about having the ingredients to make great soup. So we would say that the Northeast has all the ingredients to make great soup, okay? In other words, to make great investment companies. It's got fantastic research institutes, universities, and on the other side, and the private sector side, it's got all these companies in the region satisfying all of those sectors I mentioned earlier. So unsurprisingly, that's what we're going to be looking for. That's what we're going to be encouraging to spin out to license from universities, but also from technical institutes and corporates. So it's very easy to get lost in the university thing when you talk about IP. We don't care where this IP comes from. Often it comes from corporates. Won't mention the name, but we were involved in helping one of the biggest corporates in the Northwest to spin out technologies that it decided were non-core to its that happens a lot. Big corporates, there's a lot of IP developed on a weekly basis. Huge percentage of it is of no interest to the strategic direction of the company at the time. It metaphorically goes into a filing cabinet. And some companies, particularly some of the pharma companies, they actually have a 7-year rule. They'll go back into those filing cabinets every 6-7 years. They'll dig out the stuff that's in there and they'll look at it and see, is it relevant now? And some of it is. And they've got teams of people who do that, which I think is fascinating. So, large corporates, domestic and international, based in the Northeast, will also be very interesting to us as potential sources of investment for this fund, because they generate IP just like universities do.
Yeah, it's really, really heartening to hear you saying all this, because it does feel at times like when you're based here, not just me, but a lot of people in my network, it feels like we're trying to push out all of the time, tell the rest of the country or the rest of the world about this stuff.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've obviously done your homework, you and your team, but it helps that you live you live in Durham, don't you? You live in the region.
It helped. What also helped was, funnily enough, I think a lot of people have found this, it helped with the period of lockdown we've been through, because I've been able to pick up the phone to people who normally would be far too busy to talk to the likes of me, and pick their brains and, follow up the next day, and, Teams called, Zoom, WhatsApp, all of that stuff, where I've been able to have, long conversations with people, and that's been fantastically useful, I must say, in terms of building our picture of what's out there, who are the movers and shakers, how should we make sure that, we develop and promote a fund that is absolutely bespoke for the Northeast. Probably wouldn't work anywhere else. That would be a sign of that we've got our jobs right. Is literally you could not pick up what we developed for the Northeast and plonk it somewhere else. It wouldn't work. If that were true, we've done it right.
Yeah, no, that sounds excellent. So when you're talking to people outside the region about the Northeast, do they know much about it, or is this all completely new to them? They're totally oblivious to some of the stuff that's already here, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, we would say almost, I mean, obviously it's not good as far as the Northeast is concerned, but it's quite good news for us in terms of the fact that we think we've not just found something that's quite special, but we think we have a way, because of, the networks we have and the work we've put in, we think we have a way of commercializing it, to the benefit of all involved, not least of all the region. So there isn't a great deal of awareness, apart from, of course, the fact that the national institutes, some of the national institutes that I hear, a lot of people know about those, mitochondria, obviously, aging and so on. So, it is on the map academically. It's less known as somewhere which is a sort of a honeypot of highly commercializable IP, because it isn't that at the moment. Let's not pretend. It can become that, and we think, because of the homework we've done, we think that we know how to make it that, because, as I say, the ingredients to make great soup are already there, but they're not evident enough for there to be the feeding frenzy that you get in Oxford or in Cambridge, partly because people haven't thought through, well, hang on, there are 5 universities, put them together, look at that. Now, why am I telling you this, knowing that I'm not just talking to you one-to-one? Because it serves us all to recognize that, and we're confident enough in our expertise, which is pretty rare in the UK. It does exist, as I've mentioned, that, yeah, there'll be lots of people who might listen to this and think, oh, why don't we do that? Great. You know, show me your experience going back to 1983 in some cases of my colleagues, or in my case back to 1996 when I first started at Beeson Gregory. You know, you can't manufacture that. So we're pretty confident to get out there. Well, speaking of confidence, one thing which I think is always a wonderful thing to see is, you know, if you go to a US venture capitalist or private equity website, you'll see on there that very often they don't just bang on about the investments they've made and how successful they were with the Googles and the WhatsApps and all the rest of it, but they also have a little list of all the ones they missed. Yeah. That's how we feel. That's where we are. You know, open source, tell everyone about the opportunity, because if we keep it to ourselves, we're never going to achieve what I think you were alluding to earlier, which is wider recognition outside of the region, that this is actually a fantastic source of IP, work ethic, ambition. It's just not had the catalyst. And we think we're going to be part of that catalyst. We're not the catalyst, you know, that's far too arrogant, but we absolutely think that we can be a big participant in it. Yeah, because we can bring case studies. We can say, this is how we've done it. This is how it's done. It's not conjecture. It's not fantasy. It can be done. It's very hard work. And that's another reason why not a lot of people do what we do, because it is really hard work. And even raising the fund, it'll take a considerable amount of time to get that done. So you'll have to bear with us.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, there's a guy called Peter Davison, who was the first seed investor in PayPal, right? Australian guy. And he came over to Newcastle. And the only reason he came here was because his ancestors were from Newcastle. So he got in touch out of the blue. Well, his assistant got in touch and said, Peter Davison's been tracing his family history. He's seen all the stuff you're doing. Would you like to meet him? So of course I was like, yeah, of course. So
fantastic.
So he came over, and I spent 5 days with him, just showing him around, getting him to like see everything going on, and I wanted him to fall in love with the place and how is that. And at the end of the week, he said, you've got everything you need here. You've got all the ingredients. What you need is you need someone or a group of people to drop a load of money into the region. And then people will stop and take notice and say, oh, that's interesting. Why are you doing that? So he was convinced that it had everything going for it.
And that's part of the knock on of, you know, if you do get the funding right, is you end up with 2 things that are obviously connected. One is you reduce the brain drain from a region. You know, there's some horrendous statistic. If you type into Google brain drain from the Northeast, it's one of the highest in the country. People get educated and they leave. And the other is reverse brain drain, you know, where, you know, which is what we hope to do, where A, we hope to slow down some of the brain drain, and B, we hope to actually encourage people to come back. And, you know, actually, if you look at, for example, Durham University, with which I have an involvement in one of their colleges, you know, and all universities, it's not expressed explicitly a Northeast thing, but, you know, they're very good at getting their alumni to come back and invest in their universities. And Durham announced quite a big chunk of money. I think it was high single-digit millions that they got recently from 2 or 3 alumni that had got together and have contributed to some of the research in the region and the business school. You know, great. We want to be part of that. You know, we'd love alumni to get involved in what we're doing. 2 reasons: 1, invest; 2, bring their experience back. You know, that's what other countries do unashamedly the world over. They send their young off, They go off, they learn, they pick up all this experience, and then they bring it back into their countries and make success of themselves. You know, we can do that in our own little way. We can contribute to that in our own little way in the Northeast.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed in the last probably 18 months or so an increase in what called boomerangs, people who are coming back. You know, people who
Very good.
went to university here or they grew up here, they've gone away they've gone on to be really successful, and then they've decided to come back for whatever reason. Sometimes it's to raise a family, or the partners from up here, or to look after elderly relatives, or whatever, or higher quality of life, or whatever. But there's definitely been an increase in that in the last, I would say, 18 months or so. And these are really high caliber people that are coming back. And
yeah,
it's a combination of things. It's not just the lifestyle. It's things like the National Innovation Centres. It's they're hearing more positive stories coming out of the region. And yeah, it's all these things.
Also, being being a Northeasterner matters. I mean, I'm not a Northeasterner. You know, I'm an Irishman, but you know, partly perhaps it's because of that. You know, I can see it and smell it when I'm confronted with it. And in the Northeast, there's enormous pride about being from this region. And you know, that's going to be very important. That's going to be very important to us and to what we're doing, say, in terms of the boomerangs and others. I think there's also, this is for another day, but you know, there is, I think we have a relatively old population in the Northeast compared to other regions. And, you know, those are very often older people with an enormous amount of experience who, some of them have, you know, the Northeast is partly because of the brain drain, but partly because of its historic industries, has been a great exporter of expertise, particularly engineers, you know, overseas. Overseas experience, you know, incredibly valuable. We really like working with people who've not just worked in the UK, because they bring a totally new other dimension to their work ethic and experience and preparedness to take risks and other things. And we've got a large number of those people in this region, some of whom have come back and retired, but some of whom, you know, we will be keeping our eyes and ears out for those sorts of people as well, who can bring a sort of level-headed, calm, been there, done that type of expertise to our investee companies. So yeah, that'll be another part of another string to our bow, we hope.
Yeah, exciting. So what's the plan now then in terms of, well, you talk outreach or engagement is another word that you may want to use in terms of obviously this is one way that we're doing it through this video and through the networks that we've got, but what, like, obviously it's difficult, can't really do physical on the ground events at the moment, and but what have you given it much thought about how you're going to do that?
Do you mean in terms of raising the fund, or when we've raised the fund?
Both. I mean, what's the timescales for that in terms of getting the word out about the fund? Because you do, I think you said before we started recording, you want local Northeast investors to put some money into it.
Look, for us to be at all credible, you know, we can be credible in terms of our expertise, but to be credible to the investors, we need to be credible in front of, to raise sufficient capital to make this work for the region. You know, as I say, we're not messing about with, you know, single-digit millions, pointless. You know, we need to, when we're talking to international companies, large domestic companies, and frankly, government sources of cash, you know, we need to be talking to them with the credibility and the gravitas of having already, of being able to being able to demonstrate that we have the support of, you know, certain individuals in the region. We all know who they are. You know, they need to be part of this. Otherwise, we'll say, well, why aren't they involved? Oh, you know, they'll come in once, you know, such and such a big corporate comes in. Not good enough. You know, it's the wrong way round. This needs to be a Northeast effort, and a Northeast, you know, people getting behind this with more than just words, and that will give us the gravitas and the credibility to go out and talk to the large corporates and UK Gov and say, right, you know, this is a Northeast effort. This isn't just, us as Northeast Capital. This is, look at the support we've got. Let's make it happen. So I don't want to get into specific timescales as to when that will happen. We are close to doing what you might call a soft launch, i.e. going out into the market and talking to those Northeasterners and saying, right, what do you think? And the natural process then will evolve of talking to the others and getting the fund to a size where it's viable, which again, I probably won't go into here, but it's tens of millions. So that's in terms of, if you like, outreach to potential investors. Once the fund's up and running, we're going to dedicate resource internally to work with an external partner to just start getting out and doing workshops and sponsoring events and just becoming part of the community, over and above just finance. Because we need to convince our clever inventors that there is a process, that it's not as scary as it sounds, and others that it's worthwhile doing, and because they, to be honest, they've been through, since 2001, they've been through a sort of valley of a complete absence of expertise in this area. Funds, don't get me wrong, great funds, great venture capital funds in the region, but not the same level of expertise. We're specialists in this sector. We're not generalists. We're specialists. So we would say that we were bringing something very new in terms of that specialization to the region. So we've got to get out there and demonstrate that to people, to inventors, in order that the deal flows. And not just, in the early days when it's all terribly exciting, but, as we move through our 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th year, that's the level of commitment required to make this happen.
Yeah, amazing. So you kind of need to do two things at the same time, don't you? Obviously, you've got still raising the fund, but you want to start letting people know that there will be a fund available, and you want to get on people's radar so that when you want to start having maybe conversations or just getting.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good idea from the conversation we've had really since March, when we first started to pick up the phone to people, having spent the previous 6 months thinking about how we were going to do this. We've got a very clear idea as to where the real highlights are in the universities in the region, in the technical institutes, and in the corporations. And to a certain extent, once we've raised the fund, it will develop its own buzz. It'll be a magnet of sorts. There'll be a certain amount of unsolicited approaches from people who are excited about what they've designed, developed. And that's great. But we already have a pretty good idea as to, we've earmarked some very interesting research groups that we'll be working closely with to help them realize their commercial potential. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, don't get me wrong, but there's enough of it.
Exciting. So time scale wise, I mean, it's.
I'd rather not get into how long it's going to take for the fund to be raised, because these things can take a very long time.
Yeah,
they really can. So if you'll forgive me, I won't go into that. But yeah, and I'm not gonna get into that. It'll entirely depend. The very first step for us is going to be: are there sufficient believers in this region, in their own region? I mean, we think we're pretty straightforward. People can work out whether we can do it or not in a heartbeat. We've got a track record. We're completely exposed to that track record, and it is excellent. I'll give you a parallel. So we were asked to help a country in Central Asia which needs to move away from oil and gas as its 99.9% source of GDP. You know, and so they quite rightly decided they wanted to become a knowledge-based economy, which essentially is, you know, let's start generating GDP from our know-how, from our capability within our universities, from our people, not just from our oil and gas resource, which was very laudable. But one of the problem we found was that they knew what they wanted to achieve, but they didn't believe in themselves. Every turn, you know, so we put together a plan for them to do this. And once the plan was there, it was almost as if, well, we've done what we said we're going to do. We know what the plan looks like. Well, now I need to do it. Oh, but we don't really have the expertise. But you do. Well, yeah, but we've not really commercialized very much. No, well, that's because this, and this isn't in place. Yeah, but yeah, and you think, where's your self-confidence? You know, and I think part of maybe our role is to, just through practical, pragmatic steps and track record and case studies are everything, to start to, you know, deal with some of what we think does exist to a degree in the Northeast, which is at times a lack of self-confidence in this specific area.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously we're brimming with confidence about the potential. But just on that case study point, one of the experience of Oxford University is, I know every time I mention Oxford University to someone in the Northeast, they go, oh God, there he goes again. He's talking about, it's of no relevance at all to us in the Northeast. Will you stop talking about Oxford?
You can
well,
you can learn from them. Yeah.
But Oxford didn't become the success it is in spin-outs overnight, you know? And one of the things that has driven Oxford and Cambridge and, you know, MIT and all these other great universities around and research institutes around the world, in terms of their success in spin-outs, is getting the first one or two really successful spin-outs going. You know, and as one professor in a university said to me, it was when the first professor turned up in a Ferrari in the car park. I said, okay, look, that's not going to work everywhere. That is an example. You know, some people don't even like Ferraris, and I might be one of them. But the point he was making was, you've got to create some, I think in public sector speak, they call them lighthouses. You've got to create an example and show that it can be done. Now, the region has produced, by our calculations, 106 spin-outs in the last 10 years. And there are some, you know, some noteworthy examples in there. But it needs more, and it needs more at the startup level. And I should say that there are a lot of very, very good people within the universities and outside the universities, helping to get the universities to work together, who are, you know, who really know what they're doing, who are doing their best to encourage their universities through their technology transfer offices, as they're called, to, you know, produce more spin-outs. So I think it's important to say, perhaps as a closing remark, that, you know, we're not doing this on our own. If we were, again, it would be hopeless. Yeah, there are a lot of good people in the universities trying to make this happen as well. Yeah. What they're missing is someone like us. Doesn't have to be us, but someone like us with this specialist subject experience that we have, to sit on the outside, on the private side, if you like, and to, you know, effectively create that baton, you know, so that the whole system can then run efficiently and spin-outs can start happening at a faster rate. Businesses that are, you know, better prepared and better funded to become, you know, great Northeast technology businesses.
Yeah, I think you're totally spot on what you're saying about the lack of belief, and it's I think that's going to be a key part of what you do, is that injection of belief into the region, which if you're just from the area, and you don't know how good you are, like it is good to have people from outside the region or with expertise in like specialists like yourselves say, no, you do have what it takes, you've got everything, and we'll help you, you know, arm around the shoulder, we'll guide you through this process. And because at one point the Northeast and the North was the center of the world, wasn't it? The industrial,
absolutely.
And it's been lost over time, but yeah, we can get that back again. We can definitely get that, because the ideas, like you say, and the skills and the hard graft and passion and is here. It just, yeah, maybe the support is there. Definitely, I think the university do a lot of great things. There's some initiatives to try and encourage more entrepreneurs within the academic staff, but maybe what they haven't got is that specialist knowledge of doing what you do and the funds. Yeah. To do it. So yeah, partnerships are going to be key, aren't they? But you've already got them in place, though.
Well, we've got many in place, but there are many that we you know, we certainly wouldn't claim to have them all, you know, sewn up, or whatever the expression is. You know, we've still a hell of a lot more to learn, and you know, to be frank, you know, once we fire the first shot as an investor, we'll be doing a whole lot of learning all over again. You know, that's the nature of the beast. Yeah.
Okay. So if people want to know more about this, what should they do? How should they get in touch?
Probably simplest is to get in touch with me at Core Technology Ventures Services. We've got a website, and obviously I'm contactable by email. So if you type into Google Core Technology Ventures Services, it'll come up, I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, and we've got a get it as well, so people can see it in the comments underneath.
Great.
I'm really genuinely excited that you're doing this, and
thank you.
Really glad that you got in touch and that you agreed to do it. So
and best of luck with Newcastle Startup Week. Fantastic. Yeah, great initiative. Well done, mate. Nice to see you.
You too.
All right. Cheers. Bye.